The rain came down in sheets that October afternoon, the kind of rain that soaks through your clothes in seconds and turns the world into a blur of gray. Most kids were already gone from Lincoln Middle School, rushing to their parents' cars or climbing onto buses that would take them home to warm houses and hot meals. But one boy remained standing on the sidewalk outside the main entrance, completely still, as if he'd forgotten how to move. His name was Daniel, and he was 12 years old. His backpack hung from one shoulder, getting heavier by the minute as the rain seeped through the fabric. Water dripped from his dark hair into his eyes, but he didn't bother to wipe it away. To anyone passing by, he might have looked like he was waiting for someone, but the truth was Daniel wasn't waiting for anything. He just didn't know where else to go. The day had started badly and gotten worse with each passing hour. Daniel had woken up that morning to an empty house, which wasn't unusual anymore. His mom had left for her shift at the hospital before dawn, leaving a note on the kitchen counter with $20 and a reminder to heat up last night's leftovers for dinner. His dad? Well, his dad didn't live with them anymore. He'd moved out 3 months ago, and Daniel still couldn't bring himself to call the cramped apartment across town. Dad's place. School had been a disaster. During lunch period, something happened that Daniel kept replaying in his mind like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He'd been sitting alone at his usual spot near the windows when 3 boys from his math class approached his table. They were laughing about something, and at first Daniel didn't pay attention. He'd learned to become invisible, to blend into the background like wallpaper that nobody really sees. But then one of them grabbed his backpack from under the table. Daniel's stomach dropped. Inside that backpack was his journal, a black notebook where he'd been writing his thoughts for the past few months. His counselor had suggested keeping a journal might help him process his feelings about the divorce. Daniel had been skeptical at first, but he'd actually started to like it. The journal was the one place where he could be completely honest about how much everything hurt. The boys found the journal quickly. Daniel lunged for his backpack, but they tossed it between themselves like a game of keep-away. When one of them opened the notebook and started reading aloud, Daniel felt something break inside his chest. His private words, his deepest fears, his confusion about why his dad left, his loneliness, his feeling of being invisible in a school full of people, all of it was being broadcast to the cafeteria like entertainment. Kids started laughing. Some pulled out their phones. Daniel heard whispers and saw fingers pointing. He wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and never come back. Instead, he did something he'd never done before. He grabbed his journal back with such force that he stumbled backward, then he ran. He ran straight to his locker, shoved the journal inside, and in a moment of pure rage and humiliation, he threw his phone against the metal door. The screen shattered into a spider web of cracks. The rest of the day passed in a fog. Teachers called on him, but he barely heard them. Other students gave him strange looks in the hallways. By the time the final bell rang, Daniel felt like he was walking through water, every movement requiring more energy than he had. He'd planned to go straight home, but when he stepped outside and felt the rain on his face, something stopped him. Home didn't feel like home anymore. It was just a quiet place where he'd sit alone until his mom came back exhausted at 9 or 10 at night. They'd exchange a few words. She'd ask if he'd eaten, he'd say yes, and then they'd both retreat to their separate rooms. She was doing her best, he knew that. But her best meant working extra shifts to pay the bills that used to be split between 2 people. Her best meant she was barely ever there. So Daniel just stood there in the rain outside the school as the parking lot emptied and the buses pulled away. The security guard had gone inside. The last few teachers had driven off. It was just him in the storm, and somehow that felt right. The rain matched what he felt inside, cold, overwhelming, impossible to stop. He thought about the journal incident and felt his face burn with shame despite the cold rain. Those words weren't meant for anyone else. They were his way of making sense of a world that had stopped making sense the day his dad packed his things and left. Daniel had written about feeling like he wasn't enough, like maybe if he'd been a better son his dad would have stayed. He'd written about hearing his parents fight late at night, about the silence that followed, about how his mom cried in the bathroom with the water running so he wouldn't hear. Now everyone at school knew. By tomorrow, it would probably be all over social media. The thought made him feel sick. Thunder rumbled overhead, and Daniel wondered what would happen if he just stayed there. Would anyone come looking for him? His mom wouldn't be home for hours, and she'd assume he was safe inside the house. His dad had his own life now. His own apartment, his own problems. The school was locked up for the night. In a weird way, standing in the rain felt like the most honest thing Daniel had done all day. At least here he didn't have to pretend everything was okay. His hands were shaking, though he couldn't tell if it was from the cold or from everything else. He could feel his heart beating hard in his chest. That panicky feeling he'd been getting lately, like the walls were closing in and there wasn't enough air. His counselor had talked to him about anxiety, about how sometimes our bodies react to stress in physical ways. But knowing that didn't make it easier to breathe. Daniel closed his eyes and tried to remember what it felt like before everything fell apart. There were good memories buried under all the pain. Family dinners where everyone actually talked and laughed. Saturday mornings when his dad would make pancakes and they'd watch cartoons together. Even though Daniel was getting too old for them. His mom's smile before it became something she had to force. But those memories felt like they belonged to a different person, a different family, a different life. The rain kept falling, soaking through his shoes, his jeans, his jacket. His backpack felt like it weighed 100 pounds. His teeth started to chatter. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew he should move, should go somewhere, do something, but he couldn't figure out what. The humiliation of the day sat on his shoulders like a weight he couldn't shake off. The loneliness of the past 3 months felt like a hole he couldn't climb out of, and the rain just kept coming down, as if the sky itself was crying for all the things Daniel couldn't say out loud. He opened his eyes and looked at the empty parking lot, the darkening sky, the school building with its lights slowly going off one by one. This was his life now. Standing alone while everyone else went home, carrying pain that nobody seemed to notice, trying to be okay when nothing felt okay at all. Daniel didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change. Sometimes the darkest moments come right before the light breaks through. Sometimes when you think you're completely alone, someone is watching, seeing, understanding. Sometimes all it takes is one person who cares enough to step out into the rain. Mrs. Patricia Webb sat in her silver sedan with the engine running, watching the rain hammer against her windshield. She'd come to pick up her grandson from basketball practice, but practice had ended 20 minutes ago, and her grandson was nowhere to be found. She'd sent him 3 texts with no response, which was typical for a 13-year-old boy who probably had his phone buried at the bottom of his gym bag. Patricia was about to call the school office when something caught her eye. Through the rain-blurred window, she could make out a figure standing motionless on the sidewalk near the school entrance. At first, she thought maybe it was a teacher waiting for a ride. But as she squinted through the downpour, she realized it was a student, a young boy, maybe 12 or 13, just standing there getting drenched. She wiped the condensation from her window to get a better look. The boy hadn't moved an inch. His backpack was sliding off one shoulder, and even from this distance, Patricia could see he was soaking wet. But what struck her most was his posture. She'd been a teacher for 33 years before retiring, and she'd learned to read body language like other people read books. This wasn't a boy waiting for a ride. This was a boy who'd given up. Patricia felt something twist in her chest. The sight reminded her of a student from years ago, a quiet girl named Amy who'd always sat in the back of her classroom. Patricia had noticed the signs, the withdrawn behavior, the sad eyes, the way Amy seemed to shrink into herself. But Patricia had been busy that year, dealing with her own husband's illness, and she'd told herself that Amy was probably just shy, that she'd be fine. 3 weeks before summer break, Amy's parents pulled her out of school. Patricia later heard through another teacher that Amy had attempted suicide and was in a treatment facility. That was 28 years ago, and Patricia still thought about Amy at least once a week. She'd learned later that Amy's home life had been difficult, that she'd been bullied at school, that she'd been crying out for help in small ways that nobody had noticed, or maybe they'd noticed and just hadn't known what to do. Patricia had promised herself after that she'd never ignore the signs again. She'd never assume a struggling child was someone else's problem. Her phone buzzed. It was her grandson apologizing for not checking his messages. He was already in his friend's car heading home. Patricia texted back that it was fine, but her eyes kept drifting back to the boy in the rain. She could just drive away. It wasn't her responsibility. She didn't even work at the school anymore. But something in her wouldn't let her start the car and leave. Patricia reached into her back seat and grabbed her large black umbrella. She took a deep breath, pulled her jacket hood over her silver hair, and stepped out into the storm. The rain was colder than she'd expected, and within seconds her shoes were soaked. She walked across the parking lot toward the boy, her umbrella doing little to keep her dry in the wind. As she got closer, she could see he was shivering. His lips had a slight blue tint and his dark hair was plastered to his forehead. Water dripped from his nose and chin. He was staring at the ground, completely lost in his own world, and he didn't seem to notice her approaching until she was just a few feet away. Patricia didn't say anything at first. She'd learned over decades of teaching that sometimes the worst thing you can do is bombard a hurting child with questions. Instead, she simply opened her umbrella wider and moved to stand beside him, positioning it so it covered both of them. The rain drummed against the fabric above their heads, creating a small shelter in the middle of the storm. The boy looked up, startled. His eyes were red, though Patricia couldn't tell if it was from crying or just from the rain. He looked confused, like he couldn't figure out why the stranger was standing next to him with an umbrella. "Sometimes the rain helps us think," Patricia said quietly, keeping her eyes forward rather than staring at him. She'd found that kids often opened up more easily when you weren't looking directly at them, when the conversation felt less like an interrogation. The boy didn't respond, but he didn't walk away either. They stood there together in silence, the rain creating a curtain around them, cutting them off from the rest of the world. Patricia could feel the tension radiating from him, the way his whole body seemed coiled tight like a spring ready to snap. Minutes passed. Patricia didn't check her watch or her phone. She just stood there sharing her umbrella, offering her presence without demanding anything in return. She'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can give someone is simply the willingness to wait with them, to not rush them, to let them know they're not alone. Finally, the boy spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper, hoarse and shaky. "They read my journal." Patricia's heart sank. She knew exactly what that meant. The violation it represented, the exposure, the humiliation. She kept her voice gentle. "That must have been really hard." Everyone was laughing. The words came out broken, like each one hurt to say. I wrote things I never wanted anyone to see. Private things. About my dad leaving. About feeling invisible. About..." He trailed off, his voice catching. Patricia nodded slowly. She didn't try to minimize his pain or tell him it would all blow over. She'd seen too many adults make that mistake, acting like a child's suffering wasn't real or important just because they'd eventually grow up and move past it. But pain was pain, regardless of age, and dismissing it only made it worse. "I'm sorry that happened to you," she said simply. "Nobody deserves to have their private thoughts exposed like that." The boy's shoulders started to shake, and Patricia realized he was crying. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but quiet tears that mixed with the rain on his face. "I don't want to go home," he admitted. "My mom won't be there anyway. She's always working. And my dad, he doesn't even live with us anymore. I don't know what to do." Patricia felt that familiar ache in her chest, the one she'd felt countless times over her teaching career when faced with a child in pain. She wanted to fix everything, to take away his hurt, to make the world kinder, but she knew she couldn't do any of those things. All she could do was stand with him and listen. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Daniel." "I'm Mrs. Webb. I used to teach here, actually. English and literature for over 30 years. She paused, then added, "You know what I learned in all that time? That some of the bravest people I ever met were the ones who kept going even when everything felt impossible. The ones who felt invisible but refused to disappear." Daniel looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. His eyes were searching her face, maybe trying to figure out if she was just saying things adults say or if she actually meant it. "I don't feel brave," he said quietly. "I feel like I'm drowning and nobody even notices." Patricia nodded. "That's exactly how I felt when my husband died 5 years ago. Like I was underwater and everyone else was just going about their day, not seeing that I couldn't breathe." She'd never planned to share that, but something about this moment made her want to be honest. "It's the loneliest feeling in the world." "I'm sorry about your husband," Daniel said. And Patricia was struck by the fact that even in his own pain, this boy had room for empathy. "Thank you. It took me a long time to learn how to ask for help, to let people know I was struggling. I kept thinking I had to handle everything alone. That needing support somehow made me weak." She shifted the umbrella slightly as the wind changed direction. "But you know what? The moment I finally told my daughter how I was really feeling, things started to get better. Not immediately and not all at once, but talking about it, letting someone in, that was the first step. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was small. I don't know how to talk to my mom about this stuff. She's so tired all the time and she's working so hard. I don't want to make things worse for her. Daniel, look at me. Patricia waited until he met her eyes. You are not a burden. You are her son, and I guarantee you that she would want to know if you're hurting. Parents aren't mind readers. Sometimes we're so focused on keeping the roof over our heads and food on the table that we miss what's happening right in front of us. But that doesn't mean we don't care. It means we need someone to help us see. What if she's too busy? What if she doesn't have time? Then we make sure she understands that this is important. That you're important? Patricia reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her phone. I'll tell you what. How about I drive you home and we wait for your mom together? And when she gets there, I'll help you start the conversation. You don't have to do this alone. Daniel's eyes widened. You'd do that? But you don't even know me. Patricia smiled, a sad but warm smile. I know enough. I know you're standing in the rain instead of going home because the pain feels too big to carry by yourself. I know someone violated your trust today and you're trying to figure out how to keep going. And I know that right now you need someone to see you, really see you. So yes, I'll do that. Because 30 years ago I missed the signs with a student who needed help. And I promised myself I'd never let that happen again. They stood there under the umbrella, the rain still falling around them, but somehow the world felt a little less cold. Daniel's shivering had slowed down, though he was still soaked through. Patricia could see something shifting in his expression, a tiny crack in the wall he'd built around himself. The drive to Daniel's house took only 10 minutes, but it felt longer in the heavy silence. Mrs. Webb had given Daniel a towel from her trunk to dry off a bit, and the car's heater was blasting warm air that slowly brought feeling back to his frozen fingers. He sat in the passenger seat, watching the rain streak across the window, still not quite believing that this stranger had decided to help him. His house looked smaller somehow when they pulled up. It was a modest 2-story home with blue siding, the same house he'd lived in his whole life, but lately it felt like a different place. The porch light was off because nobody was home to turn it on. The driveway was empty. Daniel felt a wave of embarrassment wash over him. What must Mrs. Webb think seeing this dark, empty house where a 12-year-old boy came home to nobody? My mom usually gets home around 9, Daniel said quietly, checking the dashboard clock. It was only 4:30. Sometimes later. Mrs. Webb nodded without judgment. That's all right. Do you have a key? Daniel pulled out his keychain from his pocket. His hands were still shaking a bit as he unlocked the front door. The house smelled stale, like nobody had been there in a while. He flicked on the lights and immediately felt self-conscious about the mess. Dishes in the sink from 2 days ago. Mail piled on the counter. His mom's scrubs thrown over the back of a chair. The kind of mess that happens when everyone's too exhausted to keep up. I'm sorry, it's kind of a mess, Daniel mumbled. Daniel, stop apologizing. Mrs. Webb's voice was firm but kind. You've got nothing to be sorry for. Now, first things first, you need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch pneumonia. Go change into something warm. I'll make us some tea. Daniel hesitated. It felt strange having someone else in his house taking charge, caring. But it also felt like relief, like maybe he didn't have to hold everything together for once. He nodded and went upstairs to his room. When he came back down wearing dry sweatpants and a hoodie, he found Mrs. Webb had made 2 cups of tea and was sitting at the kitchen table. She'd also done the dishes and organized the mail into neat piles. Daniel felt another wave of emotion hit him, gratitude mixed with sadness that such a small act of kindness could mean so much. Feel better? Mrs. Webb asked, pushing a mug toward him. Yeah, thank you. Daniel wrapped his hands around the warm cup. The heat felt good against his cold fingers. They sat in silence for a moment, just drinking tea and listening to the rain hit the windows. Finally, Mrs. Webb spoke. Daniel, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Have you been having thoughts about hurting yourself? The question hit Daniel like a punch to the stomach. He hadn't expected such directness. His first instinct was to lie, to say he was fine, that he'd never think about that, but something about Mrs. Webb's calm, non-judgmental expression made him want to tell the truth. Sometimes I think about what it would be like if I wasn't here anymore, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Not that I'd actually do anything. I'm too scared. But I think about it. About how maybe everyone would be better off, or at least they wouldn't have to worry about me. My mom could work without feeling guilty. My dad could start his new life without the reminder of his old one. The kids at school already act like I'm invisible anyway. Mrs. Webb listened without interrupting, her face serious but not scared. When Daniel finished, she reached across the table and gently placed her hand over his. Thank you for being honest with me. That took courage. And I want you to hear something really important. Those thoughts you're having, they're lying to you. Your brain is trying to protect you from pain by telling you escape is the only option. But that's not true. There are other options, better options, and we're going to figure them out together. How do you know? Daniel asked, tears welling up again. How do you know it gets better? Because I've seen it. In my 33 years of teaching, I worked with hundreds of kids who went through impossibly hard things. Divorce, bullying, loss, depression, anxiety, you name it. And you know what? The ones who made it through, who came out the other side, they all had one thing in common. They let someone help them. They didn't try to carry it all alone. Daniel wiped his eyes with his sleeve. What if my mom doesn't understand? What if she thinks I'm just being dramatic or weak? Your mom works at a hospital, right? She sees people at their most vulnerable every single day. I don't think she's going to judge you for being human, for having feelings. Mrs. Webb took a sip of her tea. But I'll tell you what. When she gets here, I'll help you start the conversation. And if at any point you feel like you can't find the words, I'll step in. Deal? Deal, Daniel said. And for the first time all day, he felt something other than despair. It wasn't quite hope yet, but it was close. It was possibility. They talked for the next few hours, and Daniel found himself opening up in ways he never had before. He told Mrs. Webb about how his parents had started fighting about a year ago, always late at night when they thought he was asleep. He told her about the morning his dad left, how he'd just packed a bag and walked out without really explaining anything. He told her about his mom's exhaustion, about dinners eaten alone, about feeling like he'd somehow caused all of this even though nobody would say it out loud. Mrs. Webb shared her own stories too. She talked about losing her husband to cancer, about the depression that followed, about how her daughter and grandchildren had helped her find purpose again. She talked about the student she'd failed to help all those years ago, about the guilt she still carried. She talked about how pain has a way of either isolating us or connecting us, depending on whether we let people in. Here's what I've learned, Mrs. Webb said, refilling their teacups. Life is going to throw hard things at all of us. There's no avoiding that. But suffering alone is a choice, even when it doesn't feel like one. There are people who care, people who want to help if we're brave enough to reach out. But what if reaching out makes me a burden? What if people get tired of my problems? The people who really love you won't get tired. And if someone does get tired, then they weren't the right person to lean on in the first place. That's not a reflection of you, Daniel. That's a reflection of them. She paused. But I'll tell you who definitely won't get tired, your mom. Because parents, even when they're overwhelmed and exhausted and making mistakes, they love their kids more than anything in the world. Your mom needs to know what you're going through. Not because it'll make her life easier, but because not knowing is probably harder than any truth you could tell her. At 8:45, headlights swept across the living room window. Daniel's heart started racing. His mom was home early. Mrs. Webb must have noticed his panic because she put a steadying hand on his shoulder. You can do this. I'm right here. The front door opened and Daniel's mom came in looking exhausted as always. She was still in her scrubs, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, dark circles under her eyes. When she saw Mrs. Webb sitting at the kitchen table with Daniel, confusion crossed her face. Daniel, what's going on? Who is this? Daniel's throat felt tight. All the words he'd practiced seemed to evaporate. But before panic could fully set in, Mrs. Webb stood up and extended her hand. Mrs. Kim, my name is Patricia Webb. I'm a retired teacher from Lincoln Middle School. I found Daniel outside the school today in the rain, and I thought it was important that we talked. Your son has been going through something really difficult and he needs you to know about it. Daniel's mom's face went pale. She dropped her bag and rushed to Daniel, checking him over like she was looking for injuries. Are you hurt? What happened? Why were you in the rain? Mom, I'm okay. Physically, I mean, but... Daniel's voice cracked. He looked at Mrs. Webb, who nodded encouragingly. Mom, I'm not okay. I haven't been okay for a long time and I didn't know how to tell you. His mom sank into the chair next to him, her exhaustion suddenly replaced with sharp focus. Tell me what? And so Daniel told her. With Mrs. Webb's gentle prompts and support, he told his mom about the loneliness, about the journal incident, about feeling invisible and unwanted. He told her about the thoughts he'd been having, the dark ones that scared him. He told her about coming home to an empty house every day, about eating dinner alone, about missing both his parents even though one was technically still there. His mom listened, and as Daniel talked, tears started streaming down her face. When he finished, she pulled him into a tight hug, the kind of hug she used to give him before everything fell apart. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't see. I thought if I could just keep us afloat financially, if I could just work hard enough, everything would be okay. But I've been so focused on surviving that I didn't see my own son was drowning. It's not your fault, Mom. Maybe not. But I'm your mother. I should have noticed. I should have asked." She pulled back to look at him, her hands on his shoulders. "We're going to fix this. Together. I don't know how yet, but we will." Mrs. Webb stayed for another hour that night, helping Daniel and his mother map out next steps. They agreed that Daniel would see a counselor, someone who specialized in helping kids navigate difficult transitions like divorce. His mom promised to cut back her hours even if it meant things would be tight financially for a while. Some things she realized were more important than money. Before Mrs. Webb left, she wrote her phone number on a piece of paper and made Daniel promise to call her if he ever felt overwhelmed again. "Anytime, day or night," she said firmly. "I mean that." As Daniel watched Mrs. Webb drive away that night, he felt something shift inside him. The pain wasn't gone. It still sat heavy in his chest like a weight he'd been carrying for months. But now he wasn't carrying it alone, and that made all the difference. The next morning came too quickly. Daniel woke up with a knot of anxiety in his stomach about facing school again. Everyone had seen his journal. By now the story had probably spread. He'd be the kid who got exposed. The kid whose private pain became public entertainment. Part of him wanted to stay home, to hide under his covers and never face those hallways again. But his mom knocked on his door at 7, already dressed for the day. She'd called in to work and told them she'd be late. "I'm driving you to school today," she said. "And I'm coming in with you to talk to the principal about what happened yesterday. What those boys did wasn't just mean, Daniel. It was wrong, and there need to be consequences." Daniel felt a surge of gratitude mixed with fear. He didn't want his mom fighting his battles, but he also didn't want to face this alone. They compromised. She'd talk to the principal, but he'd be the one to tell his side of the story. The meeting with Principal Rodriguez was harder than Daniel expected. He had to relive the whole cafeteria incident, explain what was in his journal and why it mattered that it had been read aloud. But Principal Rodriguez listened carefully, her expression growing more serious with every detail. She promised a full investigation and consequences for the students involved. More than that, she apologized that the school had failed to create an environment where Daniel felt safe. "No student should have their privacy violated like that," she said firmly. "And no student should feel so alone that they stand in the rain instead of reaching out for help. We're going to do better, Daniel. I promise you that." As Daniel and his mom were leaving the office, they ran into Mrs. Webb in the hallway. She was carrying a folder and had a determined look on her face. When she saw them, her expression softened into a smile. "I was hoping I'd catch you," she said. "Principal Rodriguez and I have been emailing back and forth since last night. I have an idea I wanted to run by both of you." They moved to a quiet corner and Mrs. Webb explained her vision. The incident with Daniel had made her realize that Lincoln Middle School needed something it didn't have: a proper support system for students who were struggling. Not just a counselor's office where kids went when things were already falling apart, but a proactive program that helped students before they reached that breaking point. "I want to start a mentoring program," Mrs. Webb said, her eyes bright with passion. "Pair students who are going through hard times with trained mentors who can offer support and guidance. Create a space where kids feel safe talking about their problems without judgment. And most importantly, train students to recognize when their peers might be struggling and how to help." Daniel's mom looked intrigued. "That sounds amazing, but wouldn't that require a lot of time and resources?" "It would," Mrs. Webb admitted. "But I'm retired with plenty of time on my hands. And after what happened yesterday, I realized I can't just sit back anymore." Daniel standing in that rain was a wake-up call. How many other kids are standing in their own metaphorical rain waiting for someone to notice? Daniel found his voice. "What would you call it?" "The program, I mean." Mrs. Webb smiled at him. "I was thinking we'd call it the Umbrella Project." Because sometimes all someone needs is someone else willing to stand with them in the storm. Over the next 2 weeks, things started changing at Lincoln Middle School. Principal Rodriguez approved the Umbrella Project and gave Mrs. Webb permission to recruit volunteers. The 3 boys who'd taken Daniel's journal were suspended and required to attend workshops on empathy and bullying prevention. More importantly, they had to write genuine apologies to Daniel and present them in front of a mediator. The apology session was awkward. One of the boys, Tyler, seemed genuinely remorseful. "I didn't think about how it would feel if someone did that to me," he said, not quite meeting Daniel's eyes. "I just thought it was funny, like we were joking around." But it wasn't funny. It was cruel, and I'm sorry. The other 2 boys seemed less sincere, more like they were going through the motions to avoid worse punishment. But Tyler's apology felt real, and Daniel appreciated that at least one of them understood the impact of what they'd done. Daniel's relationship with his mom shifted too. They started having dinner together at least 3 nights a week, a non-negotiable commitment they both worked their schedules around. At first, the conversations were stilted, full of long pauses and awkward topics. They'd gotten out of practice talking to each other as real people instead of just cohabitants sharing a house. But gradually, it got easier. His mom told him about her day at the hospital, about the patients she worried about the challenges of being a single parent trying to do everything. Daniel told her about school, about the classes he liked and the ones he struggled with, about his fear of never fitting in anywhere. One night over spaghetti, his mom brought up his dad. "Have you talked to him lately?" Daniel shook his head. His dad called every couple weeks, but the conversations were always surface level. "How's school?" "Fine. How's basketball?" "I quit." "Oh." The silences between them had grown longer, more uncomfortable. "I think you should tell him what you've been going through," his mom said carefully. "I know he hurt us both by leaving, and I'm still angry about a lot of things. But he's still your dad, and he should know that his son needs him." "What if he doesn't care?" The question came out smaller than Daniel intended. His mom reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Then that says something about him, not about you." "But Daniel, I don't think that's what will happen. I think your dad is scared and confused and dealing with his own stuff. I think if you're honest with him about what you need, he might surprise you." So Daniel called his dad that weekend. It was one of the hardest conversations of his life. He told his dad about the journal incident, about the depression he'd been feeling, about standing in the rain because he didn't know where else to go. His dad was quiet for a long time after Daniel finished talking. "I'm sorry, buddy," his dad finally said, his voice thick with emotion. I thought giving you and your mom space was the right thing to do. I thought maybe it would be easier if I just stayed away and let you both adjust to the new normal. But I was wrong. I was being a coward, and you paid the price for that." They talked for over an hour, the longest conversation they'd had since the divorce. His dad didn't have all the answers, and things weren't magically fixed, but it was a start. They made plans for Daniel to spend next weekend at his dad's apartment, and his dad promised to come to Daniel's school events and be more present in his life. Meanwhile, the Umbrella Project was taking shape. Mrs. Webb recruited 15 volunteers, a mix of retired teachers, school counselors, and trained social workers. They started holding lunchtime sessions where students could drop in and talk about whatever was on their minds. No judgment, no forced sharing, just a safe space to exist. Daniel wasn't sure about joining at first. Part of him wanted to move on, to forget about the whole incident and go back to being invisible. But Mrs. Webb encouraged him to at least check it out. "You don't have to share your story if you're not ready," she said. "But I think you might find it helpful to be around other people who understand what it's like to struggle." The first Umbrella Project meeting Daniel attended was in the school library after classes ended. About 12 students showed up, ranging from 6th graders to 8th graders. They sat in a circle, and Mrs. Webb started by explaining the purpose of the group. "This is a space where we support each other," she said, "where we remember that everyone is fighting battles we know nothing about, where we practice kindness and empathy and the simple act of seeing each other." One by one, students shared their stories. A girl talked about her parents' divorce and how she felt caught in the middle. A boy opened up about being bullied for his weight. Another student described the pressure of trying to be perfect, to live up to her older sister's achievements. Each story was different, but the underlying feeling was the same. Loneliness, the sense of carrying something heavy all alone. When it was Daniel's turn, he hesitated. The last time he'd shared his private thoughts, they'd been weaponized against him. But looking around the circle, he saw genuine compassion in these strangers' eyes. No phones out, no smirks, just attention and care. "A couple weeks ago, I stood in the rain because I didn't know where else to go," Daniel began, his voice shaky but growing stronger. "I felt like I was invisible, like nobody would notice or care if I just disappeared. But someone did notice. Mrs. Webb came and stood with me, and that changed everything." He told them about the journal incident, about his parents' divorce, about the depression and the dark thoughts. As he talked, he saw heads nodding around the circle, saw tears in some eyes, saw recognition and understanding. 6 months had passed since that rainy October afternoon when Daniel stood alone outside Lincoln Middle School. It was now April, and the world looked completely different. Not because everything had magically become perfect, but because Daniel had learned that healing wasn't about fixing everything. It was about learning to carry the weight differently, with help instead of alone. The Umbrella Project had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a small lunchtime gathering had expanded into a full program with over 30 student participants and 20 trained mentors. The school board had been so impressed that they were considering implementing similar programs in other schools across the district. Local news had even run a story about it, though Mrs. Webb had insisted the focus be on the students and the message rather than on herself. Daniel had become one of the program's most active members. He discovered something unexpected, that sharing his story and hearing others' stories made his own pain feel less isolating. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he attended the Umbrella meetings, and he'd started volunteering to help new students who joined the group. There was something powerful about being able to tell someone else, "I know what you're going through and you're not alone." One afternoon in late April, Daniel was in the library setting up chairs for that day's meeting when a 6th grader named Kevin approached him. Kevin was small for his age, with shaggy brown hair that fell into his eyes, and he looked terrified. Daniel recognized that look. He'd worn it himself not too long ago. "Is this the umbrella thing?" Kevin asked quietly, not quite making eye contact. "Yeah," Daniel said, arranging the last chair. "First time?" Kevin nodded, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "My counselor said I should check it out. I don't really know what it is, though." Daniel sat down and gestured for Kevin to sit next to him. "It's basically a place where you can talk about hard stuff without people judging you. Or you can just listen if you're not ready to share. No pressure." "What kind of hard stuff do people talk about?" "All kinds. Family problems, bullying, anxiety, depression, feeling like you don't fit in anywhere." Daniel paused. "Whatever's making life difficult, you know?" Kevin was quiet for a moment, then said, "My brother died last year. Car accident. And everyone at my old school knew about it, and they either avoided me like I was contagious or they treated me like I was going to break. So my parents moved us here for a fresh start. But it's not really fresh because I'm still thinking about him all the time. And I can't talk about it because nobody here knows, and I don't know how to bring it up without making things weird." Daniel's heart ached for this kid. He knew that feeling of carrying something so heavy that you couldn't even figure out how to set it down. "That sounds really hard, Kevin. I'm sorry about your brother." "Thanks." Kevin finally looked up, meeting Daniel's eyes. "Do you really think talking about it helps?" "Because I've been to therapy and it just makes me feel worse sometimes." "Honestly, sometimes talking about it does make you feel worse at first. It's like when you clean out a wound. It hurts more before it gets better. But yeah, I think it helps, not because it fixes everything, but because carrying stuff alone is exhausting. At least here, other people can help you carry it for a while." Other students started arriving, and the meeting began. Mrs. Webb opened with her usual reminder that this was a safe space, that what was shared here stayed here, and that everyone's pain was valid regardless of how it compared to others. Then she introduced a new topic: resilience. "I've been thinking a lot about what makes some people bounce back from hard times while others get stuck," Mrs. Webb said, looking around the circle. "And I've realized it's not about being strong or tough. It's about being connected. It's about having people who see you, who remind you that you matter, who stand with you even when things are hard." A 8th grade girl named Ashley raised her hand. "But what if you don't have those people? What if your family is the problem and you don't really have friends?" "That's a great question," Mrs. Webb said. "And the answer is that you start building that network. It might not be your biological family. It might be a teacher, a coach, a mentor, friends you make in a group like this. The important thing is not being alone. Daniel found himself speaking up. 6 months ago, I didn't have that either. My parents were dealing with their divorce, I didn't really have friends, and I felt completely isolated. But then Mrs. Webb stood with me in the rain, and that one act changed everything. It showed me that people do care, even strangers. And from there, things started getting better. Kevin looked at Daniel with surprise. Hugh, but you seem so together. Daniel laughed. Trust me, I'm not. I still have bad days. I still get anxious about school stuff. I still miss how things used to be before my parents split up. But I'm not carrying it alone anymore, and that makes all the difference. After the meeting ended, Kevin approached Daniel again. Can I ask you something? Sure. How did you know when you needed help? Like, how did you know it was serious enough to talk to someone? Daniel thought about that rainy October afternoon, about standing outside the school feeling like he'd reached the end of something. I think when you start asking that question, when you start wondering if you need help, that's usually a sign that you do. You don't have to wait until things are catastrophic. You're allowed to ask for support before you hit rock bottom. Kevin nodded slowly. I think I need help. I think I've needed it for a while, but I kept telling myself I should be able to handle it on my own. That's what I thought too, Daniel said. But handling it on your own just meant suffering on your own. There's no prize for struggling alone, Kevin. Come back next meeting. I think you'll find it helps. Okay, Kevin said. I will. As Kevin walked away, Mrs. Webb came over and put a hand on Daniel's shoulder. You're good at this, you know. Helping others. It helps me too, Daniel admitted. When I'm supporting someone else, I don't feel so helpless about my own stuff. That's how healing works sometimes, Mrs. Webb said. We give away what we wish we'd received, and in the process, we receive it ourselves. That evening, Daniel had dinner with both his parents. It was still weird, the three of them sitting at a table together when his parents lived in different houses. But they'd agreed to have family dinners once a month, to show Daniel that even though their marriage was over, their family wasn't completely broken. The conversation was easier than it used to be. His dad asked about school and actually listened to the answer. His mom talked about cutting back her hours at the hospital and how much less stress she felt. They asked about the umbrella project and seemed genuinely proud when Daniel told them about helping Kevin. I'm proud of you, buddy, his dad said. 6 months ago you were in a really dark place. To see you now helping other kids who are struggling, that takes real courage. I didn't do it alone, Daniel said. Mrs. Webb helped me. Mom helped me. You helped me, even if it took a while to figure out how. And the other kids in the umbrella project helped me just by being honest about their own stuff. His mom reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You know what I've learned from all this? That asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And teaching your son that might be the best thing I've ever done as a parent. After dinner, Daniel went up to his room and pulled out his journal, a new one, since the old one was too painful to write in anymore. He'd taken up journaling again, but this time it felt different. This time he wasn't just recording his pain. He was documenting his healing, noting the small victories and the moments of connection. He wrote about Kevin, about how scared the kid looked, and how much it reminded him of himself. He wrote about the umbrella project and how it gave him purpose. He wrote about his parents and how their relationship was changing into something new. Something that might not be what they'd hoped for, but was still something valuable. Then he wrote something he'd been thinking about a lot lately. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I thought the pain would never end and that nobody cared whether I existed or not. I was wrong about all of it. The pain didn't end, but it changed. It became something I could carry instead of something that crushed me, and people did care. I just couldn't see it because I was so focused on my own hurt. Mrs. Webb says that sometimes we have to lose ourselves before we can find ourselves. I think I understand that now. I lost the version of me that existed before the divorce, before the journal incident, before everything fell apart. But I found a different version, someone who's honest about struggling, who asks for help, who tries to help others. I think I like this version better, even though the path to get here was painful. The next day at school, Daniel was walking to his locker when he saw Tyler, one of the boys who'd read his journal aloud in the cafeteria. They hadn't talked much since the apology session, just awkward nods in the hallway. But Tyler stopped him this time. Hey, Daniel, can I talk to you for a minute? Daniel tensed up, expecting trouble, but Tyler's expression was genuine. Sure, I just wanted to say, I've been going to the umbrella meetings for the past month. I didn't tell anyone because I thought people would think I was weird for going, but yesterday when you were talking to that new kid, Kevin, I realized something. What I did to you reading your journal, I did it because I was trying to make myself feel better about my own stuff by making someone else feel worse. And that was really messed up. Daniel didn't know what to say. He'd accepted Tyler's apology months ago, but this felt different. This felt like Tyler actually understood the impact of what he'd done. My parents are getting divorced too, Tyler continued, and I've been angry about it, taking it out on other people because I didn't know what else to do with that anger. The Umbrella Project has been helping me figure out better ways to deal with it, so I guess I wanted to thank you for sharing your story and for starting all this. I didn't start it, Daniel said. Mrs. Webb did. Yeah, but you were brave enough to admit you needed help. That gave the rest of us permission to do the same.